And I'm delighted to have a panel of extraordinary speakers for you to address this really vital issue. As Vijay said, innovation doesn't just come from within companies, it comes from outside. And at the speed at which competition is moving, we need to be able to access new thinking, fresh thinking, to challenge our internal assumptions and also to help us drive change internally faster. And so this session we'll dig into some of these challenges with Kiva and Russ. Would you both like to just take a couple of minutes, perhaps just give a little introduction to who you are and background of what you do? I think GE doesn't need tons of introduction, but nevertheless, but Menlo might a little bit more.
Yeah, you bet. So Kiva Allgood, I work for GE Business Innovations, and I'm responsible for commercial development across the entire GE platform, which is super exciting. This is my second tour of duty, as they say. I started my career at GE under Jack Welch, and rejoined about 1.5 years ago from also an innovative Southern California company. So really excited to be back, and I spend my day really figuring out how do we help our portfolio companies grow and where we need to go, as well as strategic planning across our business units.
Fabulous. Russ?
Good morning. My name is Russ Garcia. I'm CEO of Menlo Microsystems, and I'm 35 years in the semiconductor industry. I've done a few startups. I've been in some large corporates as well. What Menlo Microsystems is, and it's kind of interesting road to reinvention, is we've reinvented the most basic electronic component, which is the switch, for the electrification of everything. And what does that mean? Well, if you look around your house, or if you were to get into the back room of this building, you'd find out that there's electronic mechanical switches that have been the same technology for over 100 years. And a few engineers at GE about 12 years ago had a vision of, hey, what if we could make all these circuit breakers, light switches, whatever, remotely controllable and programmable. And subsequently went and looked at all the technologies that were available, and quite honestly couldn't find anything. They characterized a lot of different technologies and decided to reinvent the switch. And so we have a secret sauce that gives us reliability and some very good electrical performance, and subsequently have reinvented the switch.
I was going to ask you about the secret sauce, but I guess it's secret, so you're not going to say anything. Okay, we'll get to that in a bit. So, Kiva, let's start with you. Innovation comes in all kinds of shapes and sizes. As I said, it comes from within inside companies, from outside. I mean, what are the different models that GE has for kind of tapping into the ideaplex that's outside the company and inside it?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, I firmly believe that innovation is a team sport, and that's something that actually GE does exceptionally well. It's not a solo individual. It's also something that when you're 126 years old, you've gone through a lot of different iterations of what innovation could be. And I say right now, a lot of folks question, well, is GE going to be around in 100 years? Or are they going to be the same, look the same? We had that discussion. The reality is power, 30% of the power in the world is generated from GE product. That's not necessarily going to change. It may be different types of products, things that are turbine-based but in the sky, or in water, or underground, don't know. And so we have a heritage of really doing exactly what we did with Russell's company and Russ's company. We've got 4 pillars of innovation. First and foremost, it's obviously all the work that comes out of our business units. Super innovative. I'd call that adjacent or core. They're trying to reinvent what we do every single day. And then we've got our group, which is Business Innovations.
Your what group?
The group I work in.
Oh, your group. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. Business Innovations. And within that, we've got equity investing, which is what it sounds like. So we invest in startups. They are strategic investments, so they're tightly coupled with our business units. Then we have a group called licensing, which basically harvests a lot of the IP out of our different business units. Mm-hmm. Good example there is we've got a phosphor that we use in light bulbs, and it cuts down blue light. well, that's obviously become a very hot topic in the last 4 or 5 years. And we partnered with the biggest suppliers for glass, for TVs, for things that we don't necessarily play in to allow them to use that same phosphor. And then just as importantly, we have a group called New Business Creation. And that's one where we've launched 7 companies in the last 4 years, really figuring out exactly what Russ talked about, reinventing different things, taking innovation either out of a business unit, out of a global research center. We stand up a business, we hire a CEO, we get co-investors, and we launch it. And what that does is it protects it from the antibodies that a few people talked about earlier today. And it really allows it to get to the size and state that it needs to before a company the size of GE crushes it. So I think, you know, every large company deals with that. It's not an easy thing to do. It's even more difficult when you're taking company employees and letting them go. But for us, it's a critical ingredient to being able to tap into innovation and ideation from within, and then really trying to make sure that we're finding people, we call it build, buy, and partner. If we assume we can build everything better than everybody else, especially in today's day and age, when the pace of change is so quick, we'll never be able to keep up.
You might have noticed from my accent that I'm British by birth, and you know, we're kind of brought up to be like kind of respectful and be careful about how we phrase difficult questions. The good news is I became an American 3 years ago, so now I don't care. So it's not been going very well at GE, has it really? No. I mean, you kind of alluded to that at the beginning. Is this kind of a sign that the innovation models that you've been pursuing haven't worked, actually? I mean, do we need to rethink this, or are they going to be rethought, or is this more of a kind of like a bigger picture issue than just the innovation?
So GE Ventures and Business Innovations has been around, and we've been investing for 4 years. We've been starting new companies for equally about the same time. And so actually the individual who started that group, Sue Siegel, who's my boss, was just promoted. So what they're trying to do is take the same success that we've had within this smaller, more nimble team and integrate that into the larger business units. So how do we have market-facing view, and Susan from Qantas nailed it earlier, when you take a customer lens, when you're thinking about solving a problem for a customer that may be shared across all of our different business units, but making sure that the business units are coordinated and thinking about that problem in a unified way is really the direction that we're going. So yes, we have a fantastic new leadership team, laser focused on the customer, laser focused back to some of what I call the core discipline of GE from 10, 15 years ago, and they're putting that discipline back in to make sure that we're focused on the problem statements from the business units. We do that in our group because we're equity investors. We're milestone based. You don't just get a budget for the year and then keep going. You have to come back and prove you did what you said you were going to do, and so we're trying to put that same type of discipline into the business units, which it's going to be a culture shift for sure.
And what kind of things are you looking for? And do they have to be like really closely aligned with the business units, or are you actually trying to get capabilities that are like way out? The business units, but why are we doing that actually? And you're saying, no, we actually need to do this because for the future of GE, these are the kinds of things we should be thinking about. I mean, how close to the core do you have to stay?
On the equity investing, we're a strategic investor, so we do try to stay relatively close, but we are looking at frontier technologies, so a lot of the things that Vijay mentioned, blockchain, AI, machine learning. We have another successful new business creation company called Avitas, and it's basically using AI and compression technologies to identify defects in things like a flare stack. So how many people in the room know what a flare stack is? Okay, it's the thing that basically burns the oil. It's really hot and it's very corrosive, and it's really hard to find someone who wants to climb up that and inspect it.
I can imagine. Yeah.
You make a lot of money. Let me just tell you.
I'm not going. I am not going.
Yeah, it's a very lucrative job, but not a lot of people want to do it.
Job of the future.
Yeah,
okay, or not.
But if the flare stack is down for the day, depending upon how much production, that's a multi-million and sometimes $500 million problem. So it's a big number. It's not small. It's an industrial-sized innovation, and we've been able to basically use technology and machine learning to get a crawler, get a drone to go up there. They don't have to stop it, turn it down for the day because it's not a human being. Maybe we lose a drone, but we try not to. But what we're doing is we're creating the knowledge in the brain to be able to identify those defects at a higher rate than even a human eye could do. So we're transforming the services that we provide, and we're transforming kind of how we bring those to market.
Got it.
And that's super, super critical. And we're doing that based off of the data and knowledge from the folks that have been providing those services in the past. We're just digitizing those and providing them in a different and new way.
Got it.
So.
And so, Russ, your experience, so you're a spin out. I mean, what kind of things did you do when you were spun out initially, and what was the relationship with GE? How did that work?
So it's really interesting because there's a couple of things that Kiva said that I'd like to add to it a little bit, because you talk about the core of the business. We're actually a strategic source of supply for GE because GE is not a components company. So what they did was they basically said, hey, we need this for multiple of our businesses, but we're not going to manufacture this kind of thing. So they could have licensed it, or they could have spun it out. And so chose to spun it out based on the ability to monetize the IP on a much broader base, as well as create even then a better strategic source of supply. So that's one thing. The second thing is that we weren't a business inside of GE. So, a lot of times when you think of a spin out, you're thinking of, okay, I've got this business unit, it's got a P&L and whatever, and I can spin that out, set it up on its own, make it more nimble, or shape it how I need to. This was just a technology. Now, it was a technology that had been built and validated inside GE, but it did not have all the normal manufacturing things. So we spun the technology out. The IP is, we have exclusive rights to that. We built a team just like any other startup. Now, another interesting point is, had GE not done this internally and done the heavy lifting early on, it probably would have been virtually impossible. And any of you who have tried to raise money for hardware, especially semiconductor hardware, you realize it's almost impossible.
Unless you put AI in front of it. Now you can get like billions of dollars. Just put AI.
AI brains.
AI brains. You're in.
It's very capital intensive, and most of the VCs are
very true. It's been like a desert for a long while.
Yeah. A few tens of millions of dollars in 10 years, and all of a sudden you've de-risked the technology.
But how was it for you in terms of the relationship with GE? Because it's great, we let the technology go, and then everyone said you start to take off, and people, well, hang on a moment, they're not doing it the way we thought they should, or you should do it this way, and it's not helping us in exactly the way we thought. Did they try and direct you in any way, or was there friction, or did it work?
Actually, there's been some bumps in the road, but not in that area. The technologists that invented the technology and led the development inside GE came with the intellectual property, which is a very important piece of that, because that's the know-how.
Right.
Subsequently, that kind of friction didn't exist.
Okay.
We've had some bumps in the road based on trying to, we had I'll call it a semi-flawed model at the beginning, which was in order to try to de-risk it more, we said, hey, let's use a research center factory to try to build production for the near term while we're putting it in a commercial fab.
Got it.
Well, the flaw in that thinking is you can imagine that a research center factory is not a production factory, and subsequently we've had a number of bumps in the road on that. So that was the big learning experience. But other than that, I think everything's been fairly smooth. And
so for both of you, in terms of recommendations to the audience here, if a company is thinking of how to work with an external firm, either as investment in it or some kind of technology partnership or a spin-out, what are the key kinds of things they should be thinking about as they go around sort of setting up that model?
So from a corporate, so there's a couple of ways to do it. And I'm a big believer in corporate strategic partners for startups, probably mostly because I'm in the semiconductor world, and it's virtually a requirement in that world. However, if you're able to partner with either on a non-dilutive basis, so engineering, joint development kinds of programs, as well as equity investments, you've validated the technology automatically, so you've de-risked things pretty substantially. However, I believe also you need a mix of real venture in that investment syndicate, and the reason for that is it adds a check and balance and makes sure that, because what has to happen is the corporates, the executive team, and the VCs all have to have like interests. And any of you who've run a startup company know if you get divergent interests in what monetization means, what an exit means, then you can have a very dysfunctional board. So having a cross-functional team like that is really important.
Got it.
The only thing I'd add to that as well is, to Russ's earlier point is, we stand up these companies to be startups, and we don't necessarily try to preserve that they have to solve for just the GE problem. Now, that's one of the valuable things about partnering with GE is we typically know the problem statements very well, and we have really good insight and data into how to figure out how to solve that. Sometimes we're not nimble enough to do and work quickly enough to put a product together. So if you think about the technology readiness, other major point that he made is, we've got a great global research center with thousands and thousands of PhDs, but scaling that to production so that every MRI machine can use it and every cell phone can use it and every tower can use it, entirely different skill set, entirely different, actually, team has to figure that out. So I think from our perspective, we're very clear on the problem we're trying to solve, but we typically syndicate and find other partners that are well known in that space that actually can help us raise funds and make sure that we're solving a real problem. Because sometimes, we'll be a little, if it's GE only, we'll be a little too self-centric on the problem statements themselves.
Just to add one more thing to that. Any investor you're looking at, you need to make sure you're bringing in value-added money. Right, and a lot of startups get in desperation mode, and you take whatever you can take because you have to. But that value add is the same for corporates as it is for venture. And what's very important, what Kiva said here is that is GE Ventures is one. There's a number of different corporates I've had as investors in several companies. Some are on top of you. It should be done like this. As a matter of fact, they start thinking of you as a division. That's a dangerous place to be, because then, and it's actually dangerous for them because they lose what they were looking for, which was the nimbleness. But you want a big brother, a big sister that's going to help you when you need it, but allow you to go drive the business, and understanding the personalities involved and the culture involved is really important when you take that money.
Got it.
And I'll do a double click on that. So we, of the 7 new businesses that we've created, we had some that started in licensing and we were going to license alone, and then we did a double click. We had some that started in new business creation and then landed in licensing, and we have some that we looked at as potential equity investors. So like any good innovation, it often doesn't look like what you intended it to look like at the end. And having the ability to kind of really have the right measures and milestones in between those. So we do use a structured process regardless of where the money's coming from or how the actual transaction is done to ensure that it is milestone based and it's strategic in intent. So especially on the healthcare side where we've got a cell therapy new business creation and we don't do cell therapy, and so it's one of those things where we had to go find the people who were really well known, so that as we started to build this product, and as they went to go get FDA, that they had the right ecosystem and players to pull them along. Same thing with what Russ did, is he found players that play in the semiconductor space, and we brought them into the syndicate. So any really good startup or new business, you've got to make sure that the constituents that are playing with you can help you get you to that next milestone, whether that's fundraising again, getting a commercial deal done. If you have the wrong players in that ecosystem or on your board or who've given you money, it gets really difficult really, really fast.
And what's the trade-off between, so you're running effectively a venture firm, part of a larger company. What's the trade-off between making money, making the return on the equity, and learning? Because sometimes it'd be like, hey, look, Kiva, this is your target for the next 3-5 years, whatever the time frame is, and these are the returns we expect you to get, but we also want to learn all these incredible capabilities, which is the whole point of digital transformation, bringing them back in. Sometimes it'd be like, well, if we really push this company, we can get much more money, better return, but actually we might not learn as much because we might force them down a particular route.
Yeah.
How do you make that trade-off? It's got to be very delicate.
Well, I think corporate venturing in general has, in the past, had a bad reputation because they didn't follow on. It's hot and cold. The CEO changes. Now they're not investing anymore. I
used to say all that when I was a venture capitalist.
Okay.
Non-corporate. I mean, don't trust them. They do this. They change people.
But I think that you've got a core group. If you look at the data from the last survey this year from corporate venturing, 70% of the corporate folks who are in corporate venturing have a strategic intent. It's not just financial. So it is the one of the mechanisms to create optionality for companies so that they can really learn. I'd say we also have a group called Catalyst, which is focused. It's transformational change. It's a partnership with a university. It's getting government grants. It's IP oriented. It's really around trying to figure out bioelectronic medicine. Probably aren't going to see a product for the next 10 years, but super important from a long-term investment perspective.
Right.
You have to have the right vehicles for the right things.
So it's a different return profile for that one.
100%.
Got it.
The
so
measures and metrics and milestones they have to meet are number of patents, the grants, the other people's money that we get to work with. So you've got to make sure, depending upon which mechanism of innovation that you pick, that you've got the right milestones and you've got the right measures. They're not equal by any stretch of the imagination.
Want to add anything to that, Russ?
Not a whole lot. It just the balance. I guess I'll put it this way: as an entrepreneur, the fact that GE Ventures is willing to operate more like a venture capitalist makes it much easier to take the corporate funds. As a matter of fact, early on when we were putting together the term sheet, and the lead VC asked, I don't know how many times Paul asked Risa, are you guys in this for the long haul?
Yeah.
Right? Because that's the big fear. And we actually have 3 corporates we have 3 corporates and 2 VCs, and one of the two large caps, Corning and General Electric, and then we have one small medium cap, which is Microsemi. Now, based on the latest news, it'll be interesting to see how that works with some M&A activity that's going on, but and then the 2 VCs. So we've got a good balance. The board is very functional.
Got it.
But it's because the corporates have all said that they have are all acting as if they have like interests.
And Kiva, how do you systematize the learning from the investments that you're making? Is there kind of like a team that you have that goes out and visits these startups regularly and says, actually, that's really interesting, let's take that back to this business unit or to that business unit? Or is it all come through you? How does that work?
Well, we have commercial directors that actually know the business units. One of the biggest issues with over 300,000 employees for our partners is getting commercial traction. We also make sure that we do it with our customers. So a great example there is we've got a fairly robust storage and energy portfolio, but in the past we had never connected the dots where their number one customers are people who need redundancies. Hospitals need redundancy, obviously, but we had never made introductions because they have one was on our healthcare team and the other was on our energy team. We never cross-pollinated those, and so we have commercial directors that help make those connections and do the follow-up and serve as a conduit to help bridge that gap. And I would say most larger VCs, that's a best practice in the VC. If you're looking at money, ask them after they invest, what services do they provide you? And if they don't have someone who can help you gain commercial traction, that tells you something.
You mentioned something earlier that intrigued me. You said, we have this amazing R&D center. I think it's Croton, right?
That's our leadership training center.
So where's the R&D one?
It's in Albany. I go there next week.
Oh, you go
there?
New
York, yeah.
Albany, New York.
5 feet of snow.
I hope the weather's better than here. Do you think, it struck me as a reporter, I was looking back over the arc of R&D and sort of thinking, is that in a way companies have pulled back from this kind of big, bold stuff. Next week I'm interviewing Astro Teller, the head of Google X.
Yeah.
They're still kind of like out there in their thinking, maybe not quite as far as they were before, but they're still out there. Should there be like a GEZ that you that you run or that somebody else runs, it's like, should incumbent companies be thinking more boldly about the future beyond where I get why you do GE Ventures.
Well, the fact of the matter is we do not have a core business, all of which, putting out more than $20 billion a year, that isn't being disrupted by one. So in the state of a hospital, maybe we may not have hospitals in the future. It may be a little van that drives up to your house, like some examples earlier. Or you may be getting oncologists there's more oncologists in San Francisco than the whole country of Nigeria. And what does that mean for being able to provide medical services to folks? It's going to be done in a different way. And so same thing can be said for aircrafts and aircraft engines. We have roads today because people walk places, or but in places where there aren't roads in emerging markets, if you can get a flying taxi for $15,000, that's going to become the new Uber. It's not going to be a car.
Totally.
So, again, we don't have a business power, same thing, distributed, coming in a container. It's hybrid electric with storage.
Got it.
Every business we have is being disrupted. You can come up with 1,000 different headlines, and we do that as an exercise with our leadership team.
Okay.
What's the headline that scares the heck out of you, and then who's playing in that space? And we're constantly asking ourselves that question. I would say, though, out of all the Fortune 500 companies and the partnership I've had with their leading, PhDs and folks that are responsible, that we have to get better at partnering and not believing that we in our own right are going to build the best thing.
You need to go from know it all to learn it all, I think was the Microsoft
and I also think it comes down to technology readiness.
We need to go to the audience, because I've asked a lot of questions, but there's some great ones out there, I'm sure. Who would like to ask GE or Menlo Micro questions? I know lunch is coming, but let's fuel it with a couple of great questions from the floor.
They want to eat.
Anyone? Oh, one here. Could you mention your name and your affiliation?
Sure. So my name is Christina. I'm a FEMBA, graduating this year. I work at a startup, and when we're talking about the dynamic between taking smart money, and also I wonder if because you worked with GE before, you were more willing to accept the money and they're hands off. And you said like GE may come and crush you after. So it's, I guess you're
not always.
We try not to.
We try not to.
We try not to.
Yeah, great
whole
question.
point of our team.
So you have an evaluation maybe of how many businesses you had invested and how many you expect a return from, but how do you go to the, I guess just advice on what to expect when you're accepting money?
So I'll give you a little bit of background. So first of all, I've never worked for GE as a full-time employee. So
we recruited, found him, made sure we got the right guy.
So GE Ventures hired me as an EIR to help with the strategy to spin this out and raise the money for it. Well, one thing that was, and so in that process, I did that process the same as if I was already the CEO of a startup company that I was engaging with a corporate, is understanding what GE Ventures was all about. Because to be honest, I had never worked with GE Ventures prior to that too, and it was and I'm not just making this up. At first, it was a little scary because it's a 126-year-old company. And by the way, my other corporate is Corning, right? And they're about the same age.
Tradition.
It's like here you are, a startup CEO working with these old, stodgy companies. Well, you'd be pretty. I was actually very surprised at the innovative thinking and the entrepreneurship that was in GE Ventures. You interview a few of the other portfolio companies is a great way to get feedback as to how they operate. So that's what I did.
Thank you for the question. It's great. One more question before we break for lunch. One over here. Let me get a microphone to the gentleman there. Again, if you say your name and your corporate affiliation, that'd be great.
My name is Dave Cornelius. I run a nonprofit called 5 Saturdays. How do you get funding for nonprofits to get people to invest in? So that would be an interesting question for you to answer.
That's a great question. I don't have any experience in that.
That's a lunch question.
I am being 100% honest, I don't. I know we do a lot of foundation work, and in the past, that's been a conduit for the nonprofits, is to go into the foundations and try and find some type of alignment there, but I can't speak to that. So.
I'll give you my 2 cents, and only because my son actually ran a nonprofit coffee company. And so we spent a lot of time brainstorming this, because versus going out and just asking for donations, the model, and it's starting to work, but it's different. The model of going to philanthropists and saying, invest in this and watch your investment turn into 10 times what you put in. So starting to operate the nonprofit as like a for-profit company, but everything gets reinvested back into it is kind of a model that's starting to come up. But that's the extent. All I can tell you is it's much, much harder, right?
Kaiser does it well, actually. If you're going to benchmark anyone, I would benchmark Kaiser. They do an interesting job.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, please would you thank Kiva and Russ?
Thank you.
Thank you.